There we go. We're coming in. We'll give people another minute or so. All right. We can at least do the simple stuff. Note well. It's Thursday. Hopefully, for this crowd, everybody's seen it before. Please do note well. This is our agenda. Very simple. We'll be talking about our draft. There are a number of items that we know we want to talk about. There are a few items that we think we want to talk about, and depending on how our time goes, we may be able to open the floor for things people really want to talk about. But we'll be okay. Yes, it's Friday for some of you. I very much appreciate the fact that it is Friday for some of you. All right. As you know, Model 00, IETF, IAB, RFC Model 00 has been posted. There has been a lot of list traffic. Thank you all very much for participating. We've made a lot of progress on this. These are the issues that we thought that we would start with, seeing how far we can get on them. So let's go in. We have been discussing on the list the roles that were right. We want to deal with the roles for the RSC that need to be reallocated, right? And we've talked about some of them. The website, for example, has been discussed. These are issues 62 and 61. And there's a suggestion that we're okay on issue 60 as long as we're have text that looks a lot like what we have for issue 59. So the floor is open for anyone that wants to discuss any of the open issues, any of the 62 and 61 things, or anything else related to the roles played by the RSC. I'm not hearing anybody willing to talk.
It'd be helpful if we just bring up the issue text for each of these so that people can see.
Yeah, you want to do that?
Sure.
It'll take me a little longer to
start with.
I didn't have it open up.
We'll start with
yeah. We definitely have time, Martin. We have time for one-on-one. Let's start with 62.
60. Just give me a moment to figure out the sharing.
I should have brought the GitHub up before I started, and I could have done this correct. But
just a moment.
So let me stop slide share. There we go.
Okay. I've got it here.
$60. Okay, so this is the who escalates and how all that works. Are we okay with the RSAB owning escalations from the RPC and authors?
Yeah, I think this one already has consensus actually, and somehow the labels got lost. But people can open up a new issue on this.
Yeah, I don't remember any further open issues on it. I think we were okay with RSAB handling a dispute, right? I mean, it's going to go first to the stream, and the stream manager by themselves. It's just if that doesn't work, where do you go? And there's text for this and draft.
So my proposal is just to close this because I'm sure that this is already addressed.
Okay. All right. So sorry that we spent time on things that were open. Next one was 61 or 60. Yeah. 60 is open. 60 is closed. It's 61 and 62 that were open. I've said steer small. 61. You can read that.
So here we have, I think, some proposal. There's something related, some text related that Jay put out about doing the annual report, and I think that addresses 61. Jay, was that your intent? Please go ahead.
We're not explicitly stating that it is that there's been a shift from the RSE doing it to the RPC doing it, but in the text I've done, the RPC is now responsible for implicitly for gathering the requirements in order to develop its work plan.
So do you believe that we need any more text? Is the text okay at this point?
The text, Peter has, well, Martin Durst had some major issues with it, which I've replied to and haven't seen anything back from that. And Peter St. Andre had some questions about it, with one about the level of detail about the timing of how those things, the work plan is developed, which I think is a excessive level of detail to go into. And the second one, more importantly, about the feedback from the work plan and how that's incorporated or not incorporated, which is a quite a good point, and one that I'd sort of danced around a little bit in the text, and so that needs a little bit more work on that. So sorry, just we're using the words work program just as the specific text we're putting in at the moment for this.
Okay, so Martin Durst, anyone else want to talk about this issue? There's text that's been proposed. There have been some discussion and small amounts of word changes on some of it. Are we to the point where we think Peter can craft the final text based on the email discussion? Go ahead,
Peter, go ahead.
If you're talking, Peter, we can't hear you.
Double muted. Sorry about that.
There you go. Yes,
the question I
double
had
mute
for
problem.
Jay was the question about the feedback process was about how are we going to set expectations with the community regarding how that feedback process was going to go on the work program that the RPC would put forward as a proposal, and then how would that get finalized. So I don't, as with my document editor hat on, I'm not quite sure how to craft that yet, but I thought it would be worthy to discuss.
Miria?
Yeah, So I'm not quite sure if I understand the term work program here entirely, and if we really need it. I guess there's a different thing where the LAC evaluates the performance, right? So that would not be based on the work program. The work program is probably only something that is an indication to the community what's done, but that should be quite straightforward from my point of view, based on what the group is defining and doing. Or maybe my understanding is wrong here.
Brian?
Brian.
Can't hear you yet.
So, yeah,
There you go.
no, I'm on the question that Peter's second question about taking feedback under advisement. I think the key thing there is if a community member feels they're being ignored, would they raise concerns with the LLC? I think that's exactly what we've already documented under some other issue, that if a community member has problems with performance of the RPC, they'll raise it with the LLC. So I think that's really already covered. It's just a complaint about performance.
Jay?
The Miria's question about the work plan. So the RPC will not be getting its sole work from the RSWG and then the RSAB. Okay, that's where bigger things will come, certainly, but it gets some work come from the stream managers. For example, the recent terminology discussions and work has been a stream manager thing, or changes to the way that erratas are handled at a basic level of the IESG has some changes about the way that the IESG wants to handle errata. And it also gets it from authors who say, could you please do this differently, or how about you do this? It gets it from a whole variety of sources. And that all needs to be put together and delivered. And for me, the point about a work program is that is then transparent. Everybody gets to see that. Everybody gets to understand the full level of work, so that you then don't have people asking the same thing over and over again, and you understand when things are going to get done, and you can see the relative priorities of those things. It's just it's a basic management mechanism. So that's what the work program is about. And that's why it's something more than just the work that comes from the group. And secondly, because the work program is something that we are going to, if we define a work program as existing within the document that Peter's writing, then it will become part of the performance targets, because by definition, the performance targets are you must deliver what's in the RFCs. And so the performance targets will include, annually or whatever it is, producing a work plan, commenting on it, and other things. So that will be linked in that way.
If I may, I just want to capture the comment that Lucy made, because I think we did discuss this on list, and Jay, I think it's pretty relevant, so stick around for a second. What Lucy wrote in the chat was there needs to be a buck stopper for this activity. The group as a whole won't be a good channel for the RPC. So the question is what, and I think we covered this a little bit, what is the flow of information that you envision for feedback in this process? And I don't know if we covered this yet in the draft, Peter.
Not yet.
Okay. Jay, do you want to go ahead just on this point?
So what my text proposes is that the RPC annually produce a draft work plan and consult with the community on that, with the broader community on it. And that is the mechanism for feedback to come through on that. And we can have that more often than annually if required. And the buck stop it. Well, ultimately the RPC needs to listen to that and deliver it, and the LLC is the enforcer to ensure that they have done that if people are, or the escalation path where people are concerned that they haven't done that, which I suspect is going to be a never used role, but that's, it's there in case we need it.
Lucy, does that answer your question? You think that we're covered there? Go ahead. Oh no, first it's Mira. Sorry.
Yeah, I wanted to reply to Jay. Again, thank you for explaining that. That makes it clear to me, but I'm not sure we need this level of detail in the draft. I think what we agreed previously is that we need a way for the RPC to report back. And having a work plan is also a little bit explaining what you plan to do rather than just reporting about what you did. That's fine. But I think the part that we need to cover in the draft is that they need a certain level of communication and transparency. And I don't think we need to talk about a work plan there, or even like the recurrence of the work plan, how often that's done or how that's reviewed or whatever. That seems to be more detailed than need to be specified here.
Okay, now Lucy. Thank you.
The process that Jay is describing would work well for simple issues, like a request for a change in how errata are handled from the IESG. I think if you take the labeling discussion from yesterday and think about how that affects all of the streams and the need to coordinate that across tools, across publishing specifications, across LLC budgets, across tasks for the RPC, it gets a lot more complicated. And that there are, as Mira says, there are feedback loops involved there that I don't think this process handles well. I think you end up fractured. Think of it as a point of contact that coordinates.
Can I come to those? Thanks. So in the text that I've proposed, one of the things that the RPC is expected to do with advice from the RSAB is decide on any requirement given to it, whether it can say, actually, no, that's too big a requirement for us. That has to go back to the community process, i.e. the RSWG, and through that process to do that. And that is the point at which the things that you've described, Lucy, I think should be resolved. And if they can't be resolved, then that's because that's an issue with the RSWG process we need to deal with, not an issue with the RPC, which I think, is the implementer, not the place at which those things are resolved. And then separately to Miria.
That's something that's not currently in the draft.
It's not currently in the draft. No, it's in my proposed text. Is that though, which is
the process after a return is not in the draft.
Right. So you mean the feedback process after the work program?
Correct. That's not in the draft.
Yes, there's limited information about that, certainly, but that's not the what I'm tackling. What I'm saying is that the bigger problems that. Sorry, go ahead, Lucy.
Understood. I'm just flagging the fact that if you resolve on this small issue, there's a bigger issue here that still isn't addressed in the draft, which is this process of feedback and iteration. So, and who's responsible for driving that?
Well, that's what I think is addressed in the draft. By if the RPC says no, we can't implement that, that's too big, then that becomes whoever is proposing that has to go through the RSWG process, and anything that goes through the RSWG process that comes out of that, the RPC simply has to implement. The RPC is not in a position to say no to that. So that's the mechanism.
That your text works for the RPC piece of the issue. It's the bigger rinse, lather, repeat coordination of the workflow and specifying new work and coordinating it across streams and funding that is not clear.
Okay, I'm struggling to understand that because that becomes sorry, are you saying that an output of the RSWG could still have this problem of how to coordinate it across multiple things?
Lucy, you going to respond, or is that something?
I think that's correct. I am concerned that we're going to get into an iterative process here that echoes forever and gets hung up on things like funding requirements or amount of time available from the tools team or whatever. You're going to have competing requirements and not a clear mechanism for resolution.
So you're worried about the RSWG coming up with some huge project that not beating the budget. RPC says can't do it without a budget change. LLC says can't have a budget change. Now what? Is that what you're talking about?
That's exactly correct. Unfunded mandate and
right.
Buy-in from the community on a set of work done in the work program that then doesn't have a path for execution. Somewhere there has to be a driver for this. So I'm just saying. And I'll take my hand down now.
Okay, Jay, you want to respond?
Yeah, just
Michael's
very
been
briefly.
waiting, so we're going to give him a chance.
Yeah. Sorry, Mike. So if the RSWG puts something forward which the RPC says within our current resources we can't deliver that then becomes an LLC problem. Because the LLC is obliged to implement the things that the RSWG puts forward in the same way we're obliged to implement anything that any other RFC that is produced, we're obliged to implement that instructs us in that way. The only backstop being that we can't be bankrupt, and that's an extreme hypothetical. So we can specifically state that in the text. I'm more than happy to have that in there, that that the LLC is obliged to ensure that the RPC is sufficiently funded in order to implement any RSWG outputs within a reasonable period of time.
Mike, you've been waiting a long time. Go ahead.
The deal is that we keep forgetting there are lots of different cycles in this process. I mentioned it in the chat room, but doing the RFCs only starts the process of getting it implemented. Then there may be either a contract change or a task order change to actually get the RPC to do something. And so with respect to this, I would expect the LLC to push back as part of its liaison thing to the issuance of the original RFC if it's not going to be fundable, or to explain when it can be funded based on what it knows. And I would expect that the LLC would be upfront about, yeah, you're telling us to do this, but it makes no sense and it's not cost effective. So it'll get added to the contract at some point, but it's going to cost us an opportunity for everything else that you want to do. So maybe what we need for the RFCs coming through this is an LLC consideration section that basically says, here's what it's going to cost, and here's how, and here's when we can implement it. Lucy, would that sort of work for dealing with some of this?
She said that there's not sure the work program can bind the LLC, and Jay is saying, yeah. Okay, Lucy, go ahead.
So yes, it would work if there's a clear flow that says when when in the process the LLC responds to those considerations. If this working group takes a lot of time to build community consensus around something and forwards a proposal and it dies, you have a different problem then. So there is a checks and balances. I liked Marge's definition of this as feedback loops that you have to iterate through to get to the point where new substantive work is both agreed upon and funded and delivered.
Just if I may, just if I may make one clarification, jump in the queue for a moment. I think there are two different processes that we're talking about. The first process is the RFC process, and Mike was talking about having an LLC consideration section. The second process is the work program, and I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure if we've covered that that cycle. So my suggestion would be that we separate out these issues. That Jay, as you review your text that you proposed, one of the things I've added into the issue here is that is a suggestion from Miria, which I think is a good one, and it's a little bit of work for Peter though, which is a process diagram. If there's going to be discussion about a work program, I think what we're seeing clearly is that there may well be priorities, and the question is, how are those priorities set? And I don't think this group has really quite hit that issue square on.
Do people think we're converging on solutions? We don't need to wordsmith the exact text, but it seems like we're heading in a direction that we can have some proposed text and see whether we agree with it. Is that is there? Do we think we're getting there? I mean, I think Jay is getting, that text is getting there, and we need to add it. And we've got some suggestions like the implementation plan notion, or LLC considerations gives. They will observe, right? I mean, they're not going to be surprised by any of this stuff. And as Jay points out, this cycle of funding and the feasibility and its effect on other groups and money hits us all over the place in other places. Data tracker work, reorganization of how pieces work. I mean, we encounter this specific problem often, and we manage to get through it because people are aware of what's going on, and we get feedback. So I think it's all right. I just don't want to spend too much time trying to get exactly everything done right now. I'd rather, it seems like we're on the right direction. Let's let Jay do some more editing. Peter put it in. We'll all take a look at it and see if we're okay. Is that reasonable? Martin. Can't hear you yet. There we go.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This thing's too slow. I think this is entirely reasonable. I think that the text that Jay has produced is a good start toward this. I think Mike's suggestion that we deliberately include some sort of rules in here that say that the LLC's feedback on how things are prioritized is an explicit part of the documents that are produced. Now, that may be in a lot of cases trivial, but for the big things that Lucy's concerned about, yes, I think it's going to be a critical part of the decision-making process that the working group follows. And it can't just be, oh, you need another check in the process. No, I think it's going to have to be that if someone's going to ask for everything to be much more expensive, then all of those things and the resources need to be worked out as part of the discussion and not just as an afterthought.
All right. I think does anyone have any other thoughts that we haven't surfaced on this item, on this issue? And Mary, I take your point that this thing is somewhat bigger than this specific issue, but I think the solutions we're coming up with seem to address the larger issue rather than the specific one here. Peter?
Okay, yeah,
I think
was
that
what
sounds
was
good. I
saying.
think I have what I need to craft some text. I think it's not just the expense, but it could be skill sets. It could be
Yes.
things that need to be factors that need to be taken into account from an implementation standpoint, as Martin puts it. So I think I have what I need to try to draft some and improve. Add to what Jay has done, which I think is a good start.
Great. All right, I'm proposing to move on to the next item. Any objections? All right. Elliot, if you'd bring up 62. And I think, again, Jay had proposed some text here. If I'm right, if I'm remembering correct. Anybody want to talk about this?
I'll intro it briefly then. So this is the work program, and this is the annual publication on the work program, which I, in response to Miriam's point earlier about why it's necessary, it's because I think this is an important transparency step that we should maintain. And the feedback step is an important part within it, noting, of course, that more work is needed in the text about the feedback step, in particular, as Peter said, about setting expectations of what can be achieved during that feedback step.
Miriam?
Yeah, so my concern is not about implementing this process as proposed. It's just like, I don't think we need to put all the details into the RFC. The important part is to have transparency and feedback, and that's what we should write in the RFC. If you want to implement it with a work plan that then goes out once a year or whatever and gets community feedback and so on, that's a good thing. But if you want to change that in future, then you don't have to change the RFC, so don't put all the details in the RFC.
Got it, yes. Any other discussion on this item? Martin?
Comment there. I think that Jay's right here. I tend to agree more with Ethan Miriam on this particular issue. I think it's important enough here that having it in the RFC, even at a very high level, which is all Jay has really done, is sufficient. And maybe we do make some small concessions and remove, say, the reporting periods and don't specify that, and just say that they will regularly produce reports and produce a work program, and that will allow that to be adjusted so that it might be every 2 years instead of 1 year, and that sort of thing. But in general, I think this is important enough to have written down.
Okay. This one seems easy. Any other comments or issues with this issue? John?
Sorry, left to open my mouth right now, but I guess I'm going to do it. It seems to me that we are going rapidly down a path of turning these functions into LLC functions rather than functions which are managed in an independent way. That may be a perfectly good idea. It may be the only realistic idea. But if that's where we're going, and that's where the critical path decisions are going to be made, then we are spending an awful lot of time worrying about details which may not make any difference. And for the record, if there's any expectation that somebody with even mild vision problems, even on very large screens, and media goes spread across both screens, can read what's going on in the slide area right now, I have news for you. That's all. Thank you.
I'm I'm not sure. I think that helps me with what would you change it to? Like if that was if you thought that was such a big issue, right? It's a big change to how we would normally approach a problem like that. What's the alternative?
I don't know, and that's why well, it's why I posted that rant weeks ago.
Yes.
I don't know. I think we made this path maybe inexorable. But if it is inexorable and we don't have alternatives, then the sooner we recognize that and change the process of how we're trying to do this to recognize that, the less time we waste on it.
Right, but I mean, we make mistakes. I mean, all of us make mistakes, and we collectively, the IETF, make mistakes all the time. This RFC may contain a number of glaring errors that when we actually implement it, show up very quickly, and we have processes to fix it. And we have, in this particular case, a working group, and they can go and obsolete whatever RFC comes out of this and fix it. So yes, I see your point about it being different process than we have typically used for these kinds of things. I see most people wanting to do it anyways, and seems to me that if it doesn't work, we'll take a step back and do something different, and don't have to do anything special to make that happen.
There may be no choice. What's special about this is that we are delegating responsibility to 3 different groups, none of whom are guaranteed to have any expertise in this area, the working group especially, and that makes me very nervous, because if we're going to have a publication process which is run by people who don't know what they're doing, then if problems develop, it is not clear that we have a way to remedy that in the same fashion in which we have ways to remedy the IETF puts out a piece of protocol work and it doesn't work, and we understand as an engineering group why it doesn't work, and we go off and do something about that. But again, ignore me and go back to what you were doing.
Okay. Anyone else? All right. So I think, again, we have a path forward. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Elliot. Can you guys hear me a little better? Is that background noise gone?
Yes, it's much better.
Okay. Yeah. My AirPods didn't take over the microphone when I thought they did, so that's why the noise. The resolution I think we have on this one, if I understand correctly, is text needed, which is the same text that it's the same textual update for issue 61. They're covered by the same text, if I understand correctly. Jay and Peter, is that your understanding as well, just to be clear?
Yeah, I think they sort of are bundled together there. And if I have questions, I might ping Jay on or off list to craft some things with him, and then propose that on list and get that in the draft.
Okay.
Great.
Where are we going next there, Brian?
All right. So the next item that's the first line on our issues to discuss. Our next one is interaction between RSWG and RSAB policies and RPC LLC projects. So these are issues 57 and what did I do? 57 and 56. So let's look at 56 first. So this is RPC consensus.
Right, so if I can intro this again, this is addressed by the text about the work program. So which one are we on? Are we on the process of work? Oh, right, sorry. So there's already a well, the text says that the RPC has to make a decision about whether or not it can implement something without consensus, or whether something needs to go to consensus. I can see no other way other than having the RPC make that determination, unless you want to specifically create that as a role for the RSAB. It was a role previously for the RSE, but it can't be a role for the RSEA in this situation, in this setup.
Hey, Jay, I hate to interrupt you, but this I think this issue we've resolved in that there's text and then it's closed.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so if unless Brian, you see it differently, or Peter, you see it differently, I'd suggest we move on.
Well, let's open it up.
It's been reopened. I'm sorry, it's been reopened. But
yeah.
But I think the text here, what we said, right, was at the end of the day, this had to do with if there was ambiguity with with policy in terms of the freedom of the RPC to act, that the RPC would bring the matter to the RSAB, who will interpret that policy. And Jay, did you cover that in your new text? I didn't think you did, but
no, I didn't.
I think we have. I think this is the text that we agreed to as a group. Are there any? Yeah. Maybe the question is: are there any concerns with this text?
Well, and to be clear, I think this is text that's currently in the draft, in the latest version.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm gonna mark this as consensus because I think we've covered this ground, and then I'll close it in a couple weeks if nobody objects.
Let's do that and move on to 57.
Okay. So, and this gets right back to what we were just discussing about the work program.
Yep, that's right. So this is how it's said. It has to be the RPC that does that. And so this is the point about the work program, is that is the mechanism whereby which the priorities are documented and shared and available for feedback. And the resource implications of them are then negotiated with the LLC.
Right? Anybody disagree with that?
Mike.
Clarify. So the only way this gets done though is by RFC from the RSWG, correct? It has to be documented, not just, oh, it came up in a meeting and we want you to do this.
If I'm going to try and interpret Jay's answer here. Let me see if I get you right, Jay, so that if I'm understanding the response here, right? The response to that is the work program is published annually. As part of this, if the community then provides feedback on that work program, and then there's this step in which that is the comments from the community are resolved, and the question is who owns that resolution step. Is there any recourse through the RSWG or RSAB? And I think the answer to that was no, but Jay, now you'll tell me I'm wrong or it's undecided.
Step is that the RPC is required to tell the RSAB and the community if it goes against the advice it's received. And then if any escalation has to be to the LLC.
That has to be the way it goes. That has to be it. There isn't any other way to do that. Martin?
That if the feedback from the community is provided to the RPC as, say, an email, what does that engage any rules in here that would require that the RPC document that they're adhering to or rejecting that particular feedback? Mike seemed to be asking for, well, this only really applies if there's something written down in an RFC from the working group. I think that's reasonable, and at the point that the working group does have a consensus resolution that is documented, that should be answered directly. But when it comes to feedback, I think the expectation would be that the RPC simply takes that feedback on in the usual fashion. It reads the email, maybe responds to the email in a professional manner, and that is the end of it. And if people have problems with that, they can go to the LLC. I don't know that we need to document any of that, though.
Mike?
I agree with what Martin's saying. I'm still missing the answer to the question. Does the only way stuff gets onto the work program through the LLC to the RPC is by RFC through this process? Okay, and why not? If it is, I mean, who sets the things that are not covered by the documents that RSWG is writing?
Jay, go ahead. You already limited. You already listed several items that fit that category.
Yeah. So, for example, if one of the stream managers wants errata handled differently for that stream, then that requires the RPC to change their tooling around that kind of thing. If an author comes up with a good suggestion about something that would improve the RPC processes and do something differently, if there's a requirement for an experiment, such as the Auth48 in GitHub experiment, then there are a variety of things there that don't need to go through a consensus process, are smaller than a consensus process. That's why.
But they get on the work plan. That's your point.
Yes, exactly. They get on the work plan.
Yeah. Mira?
Rights every time I try to use my audio. Now I'm actually a bit more worried because, that are kind of operational things. And when you put it in the work plan and then send out the work plan for community review and ask input, then you will get a lot of input on all of these like nitty gritty small things, which I think is completely unnecessary. I mean, I think we want transparency, we want to know what the RPC is doing, and we want somebody to advise the RPC who has some kind of idea about what the community wants. But I wouldn't want to discuss all these small things with the community in detail.
Maria, are you suggesting that there ought to be secret deals?
No, I'm not saying secret deals. I'm just saying, somebody has to take its decision and we move on. We don't have to discuss everything to the total end. And of course, we need transparency. We need to document these things, similar as we have like minutes for all kind of meetings and people can look up what happened. But trying to discuss every tiny little discussion with the whole community can just like end in chaos.
Okay,
but
so
I don't think nobody proposed to do that, right? There's a work plan which has things in it that are not things that came from the RSWG. People can discuss that, but it just appears in a work plan. It's not in some approval cycle.
Yeah,
but
I think,
my
Miria, you're also
understanding
talking
the
about
process is that you have the work plan to send it out to the community in order to get feedback about the work plan, right? And maybe it's me who's still not understanding what kind of level of detail we want to put in the work plan. But as long as I don't have an understanding what this work plan actually is, I'm worried about specifying it in the RC.
If I may, Miria, is you're concerned about the work plan going too detailed. I'd suggest a little operational practice will get us over that hump. But Martin.
Expectations about how this process is going to work is probably the sensible way out of this. Like, as you say, Elliot, there are probably some operational practices that things will fall into that will ensure that this will work smoothly. I can't imagine people nitpicking things, but in the past, the RPC has made public its its plans on various things. I know that we publicly talked about the Auth48 GitHub thing that Jay mentioned, and that's fine. I don't think it needs to be a whole big event. But if we perhaps, if again we set expectations in the document, that will do the job.
It seems to me that there's no text and no suggestion that either the RSWG or the RSAB approves the work plan. We just get it and note that it includes the items we want. It might have things that we don't care about, but there's no approval. There's no official discussion of the work plan. There's just notice of the work plan. I don't think we have any more than that.
Can I speak?
Yeah, please.
As I'm in the queue. So that's not what I earlier understood, right? Because there was the idea about getting feedback about the work plan. And I'm not suggesting to like doing something and hiding that, right? It's very good to be open about everything the RPC is doing. It's just like, who decides about what the RPC is doing? That's the question, and I don't want to have like the whole community deciding about everything. And they brought up the example of the errata process, right? We changed the errata process slightly so that the RPC is now processing editorial erratas directly instead of the ADs doing it. So that's really something between the workflow between the ADs and the RPC. And it's, if somebody's interested, it's documented in various minutes, I guess, but it's like not super exciting for the community as a whole, and involving more people than those which are actually affected directly is probably not helpful.
Okay. We might want to let Peter and Jay do what they said they would do on the last couple ones, which is edit the text that exists and then see whether it does what we want. Because I think multiple people are reading different things into what's already there and the email discussion. Jay?
Definitely, thanks. I think my main problem is really I don't understand what people think what this work plan is. So that's the problem here.
Jay, go ahead.
Ages ago, I actually proposed that the RSAB sign off the work program. There's a formal approval step for it going to the RSAB. And there was significant pushback against the RSAB having that kind of authority because they might attempt to take over the world, I believe, is the concern. And so that's why there isn't that level of approval in there anymore, because we had a discussion and there seemed to be no other place that level of approval could go to. And I also raised the concern that meant that there is, to a degree, a de facto approval step of the LLC because it approves the resources within it and things and improves, have people followed the process correctly, right? So that's why we're at the position we're at, which to me is slightly suboptimal. I would have preferred the RSAB to do it, but it works nonetheless. And secondly, to Miria's point, the reason that we have to put something like the errata changes into a work plan, into a single document, is so that people are aware that this is the full set of changes to the steady state machine that the RPC will be making, and this is how they are prioritized against each other. This is the resources that are required, and therefore this is the total set of resources. Asking people to go to read minutes here or bits there or do that sort of stuff, to me, is unreasonable. We need that level of transparency for what is a very expensive, very important part of the organization.
Yeah. Miria?
More questions about both of the points you made. So one is the part about approval. It's not fully clear to me like what the full purpose about this work plan is if there's no chance to influence the work plan from anybody in the community, right? So if the community has an idea about what should happen next, and then the RPC comes up with a totally different work plan, what happens in that situation?
Jay, do you want to respond? I mean, most of us can. Go ahead.
Yeah, it goes to the community feedback process. And if people disagree with that, and the RPC sticks to its guns, and it's escalated to the LLC. We've specifically ruled out any other mechanism for that to be addressed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still questioning the point if, if you need to have this kind of plan or if it's rather something on a case by case basis. But anyway, I wait for your text. So my second question is then about this example again, right? Because this area type processing was something that was discussed in the ISG and then um, implemented by the RPC on a basically quite short notice, within a few weeks. So it's not something that would go, from my point of view, in a yearly work plan.
Well, the work plan is probably continuously modified based on its inputs. It's how often you report it. That's, I think, at issue. Regularly is the issue.
So I know I'm repeating myself, but I make my point once again. I think with all these questions about how I don't understand how this work plan works, I think we should not specify it on this level of detail in the RC. It's fine if we do all that, right? But if I don't understand what it means and we write it down, then I think we have a problem.
Again, I'm going to suggest that we let Peter and Jay work out the changes to the text that was proposed and see whether that addresses the issues. They've heard this discussion, and I think, less is better for some of this stuff, not tying the RPC's hands or the LLC's hands. But I don't think we're getting anywhere in informing Peter and Jay what to do.
Yeah, with my editor hat on, I think that, first of all, this has been a good discussion. I think we have a sense of what needs to get clarified, or I do. Just to put a finer point on it with Mirya, there are things that are currently specified that the RSC was doing under the second version of the RFC editor model that would fall through the cracks if we didn't say something along these lines. I think we should keep it high level and not go into too much detail, but taking Martin's feedback into account, I don't think we can be so high level that we just say there's a report once in a while. I think it's got to have a little bit better defined process so that folks have a comfort level that things will be addressed in a transparent way that is understandable, as opposed to just leaving all those details undefined.
Yep.
So oops, sorry. We'll try to work this into the text, the next version of the document, which hopefully we'll have out in a week or two. We'll have better definition around this, and then we can talk about this on list or at the next interim call.
Yeah. Does anyone have any problems with doing that? Okay. This also is the break time. We're coming up on the break. That's good because we're going to go into another item. The next item to discuss is RCA higher fire management. So we'll pick that up after the break. Anything before we take the break? Okay. Thank you. We'll see you in a bit.
For those listening, note that we have to change rooms. There's a new MeetEcho room, so you should close out from this room and go to the next one.